The product actually wasn't that great, if I'm being honest.
Did you sell out?
We sold out within hours. There was an 8-hour-long queue to get in the doors.
In Miami, we found that they either wanted to go to the beach at 4 p.m. or smoke dope.
Hello and welcome to How to Make a Billion in 9 Steps with Richard Harpin, where we explore how to build a successful business. I'm Graham Ruddick and I'm delighted to be joined by Richard and for this episode, Steve Hewitt. Steve is the former chief executive of Gymshark, the clothing brand. After leaving Gymshark, he launched We Are For Now, where he helps promising businesses scale up into big companies. He's also the chairman of Passenger Clothing, where he is a co-investor with Richard's investment firm, Growth Partner. In this episode, we're going to be looking at 3 more of the steps that Richard has identified as being pivotal for building a business. They are bricks and clicks and paper, hire your replacement, and go global with locals. So Richard, we'll start with bricks, clicks and paper. Could you please explain to everyone bricks, clicks and paper?
Yeah, so this is step number 4, bricks and clicks and paper. And it might sound a bit weird in a digital age because surely today is all about digital marketing. But actually, many companies have stopped doing direct mail and therefore that those that keep doing it get a bigger share of the doormat. And if I look back to Homeserve, then of our 8 million members, I would say 7 million of those came from direct mail shots. And they work as well today as they ever did in the last 5 or 10 years. And so really important. And I'll perhaps give one other example, and that is Checkatrade. Can anybody sing us the jingle? But hopefully everybody,
Not with my voice, Richard.
everybody
Not with my
can knows the jingle. And that's an online marketplace for finding a local trade that's been vetted and checked. Most people don't know that one of the magic bits of marketing is that we put an A4 folded leaflet through 16 million doors in 300 different versions for every 50,000 households. And in that leaflet, there are about 150 track telephone numbers, call a trade across all different types of categories. But what it does is 15% of our 60 million web visits a year are prompted by that bit of paper going through somebody's door that prompts them to go online. So a great example of paper generating clicks.
Yeah.
So Steve, I was wondering in Gymshark, did you ever use paper at all, or mini catalogues or anything like that?
We didn't actually, and your example there is a really good one because actually you think about paper in this day and age as something that would be, as you said, old hat, and actually you've just used that example in a really disruptive way, which effectively converts and monetizes. When I met the young guys, I mean, I got involved in Gymshark when it was seven people, £4 million. In that sector, Gymshark was never a sports brand, but if you reference sports brands in that industry, the Nikes, Adidas, who I actually work for, Reebok, who I actually worked for prior to Gymshark, the way that they had built their models were, we're going to build the biggest product range, and the way we get that to market is by really being reliant on way too many retailers who actually don't really care too much about your brand, not certainly in the same way that you do, and effectively trying to get in as many doors in as many locations across the globe. And that's how actually those brands traditionally built their businesses, and to a degree still do. Gymshark, Ben Francis, when he was 19 and a half years old, he hadn't shaved at that point. I'm not even sure Ben's still shaving now, actually. And if he's listening to this, he will smile at that, because me and him have that joke for a long time. But I think the way that they looked at the market was actually we can build a community through a sort of a slightly different way of doing it. So it's probably their version of paper, which was actually building an online community via YouTube. And they did that through some relatively influential YouTubers, American-based YouTubers. There was about 6 or 7 of them who had a relatively decent following compared to today's standards. It wouldn't be a huge following, but those guys had a cult following. And when those guys went out to their community, if they said, actually, this is a brand to back, whether it be a nutrition brand, whether it be a fitness apparel brand, that community sort of effectively followed them. So actually, when I look back, Ben and Lewis, actually, as the co-founder, probably didn't know what they didn't know, but they were true pioneers in actually understanding that they had to look at the way that they were going to bring this product to market in a very different way.
They really perfected the influencer and ambassador model, didn't they? And others have copied that, and copying is good, we know. But maybe it's never too late, and you still keep in touch with Ben, as I do, and shouldn't we be going to him and saying, well, you're doing all that clever stuff, now why don't you do some extra basic stuff?
Yep.
And I'm a great believer in looking at other examples, and Charles Tyrwhitt, the menswear business, I get those catalogues through my door about at least one a month.
Yep.
White Company, Sweaty Betty, and I think it's criminal that when particularly the first order of Gymshark clothing arrives in a customer's home, expectation of opening the box, trying it on, and they think, wow, this is great, I want to buy some more Gymshark kit.
Yep.
And having a mini recycled catalogue in the box saying, you bought this, but how about one or two of those other items?
Yep.
Isn't it a trick he's missing?
I think so. I think it's all about testing and learning, isn't it? So, the best brands in the world are the ones who actually test and learn and understand what works, what doesn't work. But, I don't think there's any one route to market. If you look at the way that brands now in organisations grow, they do that off sort of three growth levers. They do that off geography, which is probably, and we'll come on to that, that's probably the most complex, but also the most scalable. Two is channel, which is exactly what we're talking about here, how you connect with that consumer. And I think actually, if I go back to the original conversations with the guys, they were like, we can build this into a multi-billion-dollar turnover brand, but purely being based online. I think actually what Gymshark have found is that you can do that relatively well, and you can do that actually relatively cost effectively well. But there's a point where only one channel in isolation will actually only get you to a certain ceiling, and
yes,
you're now starting to see the brand now reach out to open its own doors and run big community events, and maybe, as you said, maybe the paper bit is missing actually.
And we're going to come on and talk about doors and bricks. But the other example might be, we've talked about paper to clicks, but the other way round is clicks to paper.
Yep.
So there must be a lot of people that go to the Gymshark website, and or passenger clothing that we're jointly invested in, and they have a look at the range there. They get distracted, they put in the details, but they don't click and complete the order.
Yep.
And what those businesses should be doing is saying, we've data captured the customer details. We sort of know what they're about to order, but it didn't complete. We'll send them a personalised one-page direct mail shot saying, I think this was what you were trying to order. Would you like to do it? And it's a direct mail shot in the post.
Yeah. Great conversion tool, actually. You're right. Especially with passenger, actually, where you've got a community, not too dissimilar to Gymshark, but in the sector of outdoors and escapism, and actually, you're right. Some of the people in that community actually online doesn't quite work in the same way. So, I think for me it would be again back to being disruptive, test and learning, saying right, if the conversion percentage on the website is at, a good converting website these days is probably 3+%, certainly in the UK. Actually, if I was to add that on as an additional offer, can that change that 3% to something else?
Yeah.
Or do I get a new customer that I would never have got before?
Yes. And I guess people ask, well, if I buy into clicks to paper, where would I go?
Yeah.
And actually, we've got one of our business leader members that runs a business called Paper Planes, and that's exactly what they
Great
do.
business. Yep.
So it's not just about sort of copying somebody else's idea, but who can I then get to execute it?
Yeah, and it's a really good challenge, that, Richard. I think even seeing the optics on average basket, what's the difference between somebody just purely hitting that site online, converting at, whatever the average basket is there. Does that change when actually you hit them in a different way with a different feeling and almost a different customer journey experience?
It can make a big difference to profitability, can't it? Just
100%.
Getting that average order value up and 3 items rather than 2 could make all the difference.
Like 100%, yeah.
Let's, you touched on doors. And this is about omni-channel model being really important,
Yep.
not single channel. And I would call that bricks.
Yep.
But just talk about how Gymshark sort of first got into, I think the first doors were sort of pop-up events and so on. And
Yep.
then it must have been a pretty brave move to open that first store in Regent Street.
Yeah, big outlay of certainly capital outlay. But let me just rewind a little bit first. So again, it goes back to actually Gymshark starting building its sort of I guess its community through those online ambassadors and influencers, which in today's language is old hat and is actually pretty expensive and sometimes doesn't actually look that authentic. But back in 2013, 14, those guys were the true pioneers of that, certainly within the fitness industry. I think the experience that Gymshark had is, as I said earlier, is online. Just purely having a store with some product on it will only take you so far. And actually, what we found with the Gymshark, we sort of deemed that consumer as the social native. So somebody between 18 and 30, sweet spot was sort of 23, 24-year-old female, male into the gym where their sort of life sort of collides with sort of that digital experience. However, even that consumer wants something more. So even before we thought about Regent Street, it was always about how can we think with a disruptive mindset? So if the rest of the industry is doing this, they're zagging, how can we zig and vice versa? Yep. The first ever the first ever more of an event we did was more about meet and greeting some of these online YouTubers, getting some time with Ben, understanding actually how the brand was built, what its purpose was. And actually back then, like having product at that event was an afterthought. In fact, actually, we did it really badly, like terribly, because first and foremost, it was about re-engaging and reinforcing this community build. But the maths have to work. So those, even putting on a small pop-up event evening in Birmingham, where, the home city of Gymshark, that actually becomes expensive. And especially when we then took that to the next step, we took it out to LA, we took it out to New York, we took it out to Melbourne, Sydney, right across the world. That actually becomes a hell of an effort. And I think what we found is there's an opportunity. You talk about actually, using platforms to show product off. Product is king. We actually found out over time that, yes, people, of course, want to come in and meet you and spend time in terms of the community building the purpose, but they also fundamentally want to buy some product.
Yeah, they want to see the product.
Yeah.
So how did you introduce the product at those events, and how did you display it?
Terribly initially. We had a guy called Mitch Healy and his team, who called him sort of the retail team, and Mitch sort of then was again thinking about even the way that a general store works in terms of footfall. So when they left that event, they almost had to walk through the store. And as I said, we didn't do it very, very well initially. That team became really, really good at bringing a retail product life experience to its maximum. We also had to test and learn. So we had to have a little bit of, let's call it, iron out the creases before we invested in such a huge store. I mean, it's our flagship store at Regent Street. And huge footfall. So when you go to that sort of expense, you've got to get it right first time. If I take you back to probably the best example of an event we did, it was in New York. It was on Lower Mercer Street in Manhattan, which is a very famous street in New York. And we did a collaboration with a influencer called Nikki Blackadder. So we launched off real full product event in a store with a collaborator called Nikki. And when we opened the store, we marketed it through social media. We marketed it through word of mouth. It was a February day. There was ice. I remember there's chunks of ice on the road. It was that cold. And we had a kilometre-long line to get a queue to get into the store. And the product actually wasn't that great, if I'm being honest. But because we'd done it in such a disruptive way and brought product to the helm in terms of her stamp on it together with Gymshark, it just flew. So
there were people there with credit card machines, and we were selling all that product. And did you sell out?
We sold out within hours. So the challenge it was a 2-day event, and we were thinking. I remember the Saturday morning, even Nikki talked. I remember even her words going, I'm not sure there's anybody going to turn up for this, right? We'd literally spent no money on marketing it, and there was an 8-hour-long queue to get in the door. So with the challenge we had, we were out of stock of certainly all of the key commercial pieces and sizes within the first few hours. So we learned that if we were going to, good from a demand point of view, because humans always like something they can't get a hold of. But it was also a missed opportunity in terms of actually monetizing that. And I'm telling you now that for a fact that event lost money from a one-off single event. But the learnings that we took from that really helped us think about actually that store rollout, certainly starting with
And
Regent
I guess
Street.
having the courage to do that investment in the Regent Street store. And I love retail. And if I hadn't done
great, isn't it?
Homeserve, I'd have definitely been a retailer.
Yeah.
And this conversation takes me back to when I was 15 years old, Steve. And I was running a mail order fishing tackle business.
Love fishing,
And
Richard.
while I was still at school, and I tied the flies for fly fishing and sold the fly tying materials to other fly tyers. Once a year, National Game Fair, 100,000 fishermen would turn up. And in year one, I only broke even because everything was everywhere. There was no displays. Second year, I thought, right, we've got to be organised. Lots of display cards, pricing guns, so every item was priced, special offer leaflets, and sort of tried to become a retailer. And you learn all the time, don't you?
How many years did it take you to be profitable with that?
Made money in the second year from those 3 days at the game fair.
Yep.
And then made a lot of money in the third year. So you learn over time,
Yeah.
taking that experience and then making it better.
Yeah, it's about, as I said, knocking out the wrinkles when you iron, right? So, and again, back to the Regent Street store. When we built the Regent Street and created that, it was a product hub where people could try on, and the conversion, as you well know, conversion rates in store and retail are always going to be far superior than they are online. Bear in mind, Gymshark is still a real powerhouse online business at this point. But we felt that actually AOV went up, frequency of buy went up. All of the KPIs were phenomenal. The biggest reason we invested into Regent Street wasn't just also for that particular one store. You get 85 million footfall through Regent Street every single year internationally. And Gymshark is sold to customers in about 180 countries. So It was also about them sending their message back to their own countries when they went back home and capturing data. So back to sort of, data capture earlier is how can I use that data to understand the halo effect that this store has. So, for example, did they go into the store and buy into a customized, it could be a Gymshark London range, but love it so much that actually when they do go back to online, they actually know exactly what fits in terms of what size and what colour they like and don't like.
But this is the flagship store model.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to make money in its own right necessarily.
It's a brand builder.
It's
brand
building
builder.
the brand, building the credibility of the product. And could you get any evidence that it was driving the online sales or the conversion rate? Because you'd now got the flagship store, you put a great picture of it online and help the credibility of the brand.
All about halo. And I remember speaking to Kenny Wilson at Dr. Martens about this, and he talked about one of Dr. Martens' key sort of pillars in their strategy was to build out lots of stores, get a lot of engagement with the customer, what turn them on, what turn them off, real qualitative rather than just quantitative. And then understanding the epicenter of that store, what does that do for e-commerce sales in that region?
Yeah.
And they did a great job. I mean, they've Dr. Martens in recent years have hit headwinds like most consumer good brands, but they proved that model out. That really, really worked. So for me, I think it's more than just opening a store and having some footfall through it and people having a great experience. It's about actually how can you think about that commercially to get effectively build a longer LTV relationship with your customer.
So if that's bricks and clicks and paper, Richard, tell us about hire your replacement.
I think that's a really scary step number 5 for any entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I was, if I cast my mind back, I was 7 years into Homeserve when I.
What year was this?
This would have been about the year 2000.
Right.
and hired a guy that I brought in as business development director in the UK, helping me sign up all these water utilities on our affinity partner model. And after a year, I thought, do you know what? I think he could do a better job at being the MD of Homeserve UK when we were only a UK business than me. So I called Jonathan King into my office and said, congratulations, you're promoted. I'm giving you my job. And
What did he say?
Made myself redundant. He said, fantastic, big leap of faith, and I will not let you down. What it meant was I could work on the business rather than in the business.
Yep.
And it meant I could start thinking about, I wonder whether Homeserve would work in a foreign country, knowing that I got a great guy that was going to focus on continuing to grow the UK business, delivering the level of service that we were proud of, and I could think about new growth opportunities.
Yeah.
So
Love that.
there's so it took me 7 or 8 years before I got the courage to do that. There's I think there's somebody that we know, Steve, that he was only 3 years into his business. He set up his particular business in 2012, and he had the courage after only 3 years to bring in an amazing chief exec to run his business. And I think we both know who that is, Ben Francis of Gymshark.
Yep.
And you were that chief exec that came in to run his business. Tell us sort of, everybody will be intrigued to know, how did that sort of happen? And then tell us the story from there.
Yeah, you know what? Great question. And I've definitely got more grey hairs as a result, and I'm sure Ben's got a few as well now. But no, you know what? It was great. When I first met Ben, he was, and you know, he probably wouldn't disagree with this. He was a little bit arrogant. You know, this was for me, 19-year-old kid who was a true pioneer, by the way. You know, as I said earlier, they'd built a community that no other brand had done in the same way that they were doing it. So in terms of like disrupting the consumer base, how they were connecting the consumer, I was not going to add, to be honest, I wasn't going to add much value at all. But also at 19 and 20, the one thing he realised, I think, really quickly is you don't know what you don't know. But you have to fail along the way to realise that. And people say to me, like, what were the defining moments at Gymshark? People say to me the defining moment at Gymshark was when we got unicorn status in, 5 years ago in September 2020. It's like unicorn status at Gymshark just wasn't a thing. It was never on the radar. The defining moment at Gymshark was Black Friday 2015, where we had we had done a really good job of building this community. There's a bit of a frenzy on the website, probably too good a job, to be fair. And our plan A to execute that campaign was not a very good plan A. In fact, most brands, when you go into an event like that, actually need a really good plan B, C. As I said, plan A was pretty ropey. And all the systems imploded. And Ben had gone from this, everything I touch turns to gold, founder stroke CEO, to I'm losing sleep. He hadn't slept for 2 weeks. Like it took us 6 to 9 months to sort out customers' complaints. It completely changed the business, affected something like 30% of the customer base overnight. And he came to me and said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I said to him, right, I'm going to ask you one question. It's a really important question. I said, do you want to be the biggest fitness brand in Bromsgrove? Bromsgrove being a little town, lovely little town in the Midlands, or do you want to be a true global brand? And he said, why do you ask that? I said, because the answer to that will dictate where we go next. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, if we're going to become a lifestyle fitness apparel brand in Bromsgrove, that's absolutely fine. There's lots of great lifestyle businesses out there, no problem at all. But at that point, you definitely don't need me. And you definitely don't need people who have got maybe a few more years of experience. But if you want to be a true global brand, then we're going to have, guess what we're going to have to do, Ben? We're going to have to bring in people who are way more experienced than you in areas where you think you're God, right? You try and tell that to a 21-year-old now who is, as I said, everything he touches turns to gold. And he was like, I want to be the British answer that Nike is to the US, that Adidas is to Germany, that Lulu is to Canada. And I said, okay, well, that's what we have to do. And I said to him, so he said, so he went, let's do it. And I said, there's some rules around this, Ben. And there's a couple of rules. And I said, you may not like them. And he went, what are they? I said, the first rule is you never get to play your majority shareholder card. It's pretty difficult, right? Like, not many people will tell majority shareholders to do that.
Yep.
Because there's always a little bit of ego where there's majority shareholding. And two, he's the founder. Like, this is his baby, right? So you can never play your founder card either. So if you're going to want to do this, a lot of founders do this. They delegate that authority, but then they forget to do the most important part, which is trust. And trusting is letting people fail along the way. So he was like, no, I'm 100% in.
So anybody that's an entrepreneur that's got the courage to hire their replacement, to take on a CEO, needs to establish the ground rules. How's it going to work between the two of them? Otherwise, it's not going to be successful, is it?
Constant comms. So I'm a big believer in. I think a lot of founders actually get to the point where they naturally are the founder and the CEO. I think they naturally find that actually that there's sometimes better CEOs and a founder, as you said with Homeserve. I actually think founders are better not actually being necessarily in the weeds, but strategically thinking about keeping that organisation and that brand ahead of everybody else.
I was a rubbish chief exec. I did it for a long time, but actually I learned that having hired my first MD of the UK, then that's the magic model, and hire chief execs for each of the countries that we then went into, and that was a magic formula.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look back with Ben, and he's, as I said, he's a 21-year-old. I'm pretty competitive. He's pretty competitive. And I look back at if I'd have been his age, would I have done what he did? Like, it takes a real brave decision to do that.
Yeah, great to have that courage.
Like,
and I think
100%.
in Procter & Gamble, we had a recruitment saying which was has done, can do, will do.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing, Stephen, for everybody to realise, you were a proven MD chief exec.
Right? Yeah.
So you'd made the leap as commercial director from Reebok Europe into a couple of MD chief exec roles.
And you know what you learn? You learn by making lots of mistakes. I always look at, people's learning as an MD CEO. You go on a journey of, we all Google stuff, we then put that into practice, but actually the real learning is actually about making mistakes and failing really quickly. So, and I think the other thing that founders or entrepreneurs listening to this, I spend a lot of time with founders in that SME world, a lot. And probably the one biggest challenge that I see as a common ingredient is their ability to go, you know what? If I'm going to delegate this responsibility and bring somebody in, then I have to trust. So, and when I say trust, I don't just mean we're gonna exchange a couple of emails and I'm going to keep you up to. I'm talking about vulnerability trust here. So me and Ben were completely different backgrounds, completely different age brackets. He understood the consumer way better than me, but I understood how to build a business probably better than just because of years of experience. But the trust that we had was unbreakable.
And then I think it's what were the measures of success? And I think I would say two things. One is that 5 years after you came in, the business was worth that magic unicorn £1 billion, not dollars, proper money.
Yeah.
And then secondly, that Gymshark got there without needing any a fundraise.
We built a business from £5 million turnover in 2014 to 500 million 6-7 years later with no external funding, no debt facility, and it was just a real great organic model. So one of the things that Gymshark gets talked about, and rightly so, is its ability to really engage people on its purpose, but also then sync its audience with a sort of a really laser focused view. And when you get that right, you just get a unbelievable great brand position. All the best brands in the world are the ones who are phenomenal at building brand positioning and being really relatable. And we were obsessed with that community build. What people didn't see externally is we were just as obsessed as on the business model, because I always say, if you want to go and do the nice things as a brand, the maths have to work. Yep. So that involves not only profit, but also working, especially in an inventory-based business, working capital.
Yeah, all the stock. And I think it was about having a very tight operating plan because you knew how to do it. You'd done it before. anybody else, a founder sort of trying to learn as they go, would have ordered too much stock or not enough,
Yep.
cash flow tied up, better bring in an investor earlier.
Yep.
So I think that was the key measure of success. So
Absolutely. We also operated, albeit we're a private company, we operated a little bit like a public company would do, where we absolutely had we built a phenomenal North Star based on 4 buckets over 36 months, and we sort of continue looking at those milestones across those 36 months. But the way that we fundamentally run the numbers is we ran the numbers on a quarterly basis, just like a public company would do with its shareholders. So, and we did that, of course, internally from a commerce perspective, where we also incentivize people financially with an uncapped quarterly bonus program where, we built a phenomenal environment. I am obsessed with people environment. But also, a pat on the back does not pay the mortgage. So you've got to get the balance right of building the right environment, but also making sure that people, I'm going to smile here, Sunday night at Gymshark had to feel like Christmas Eve. So when Monday morning came, nobody thought, that whole British, I'm going to be really British here, we live our lives where we get to Sunday night, we've had a great weekend, and we get that dread of, I've got to go to work tomorrow. And most people go on a Monday morning, and guess what they do? They wish their lives away to a Friday, and they repeat that for 52 weeks of the year for 45, 50 years of their working life. And we're like, we're not building this rocket ship in that way. We're going to build this rocket ship in a way where it's a bit of a movement. And my goodness me, we had such a good environment where people actually, I remember seeing people go off on their holidays, but the following day they were in lunch. And I was like, are you not supposed to on holiday? They're like, we had FOMO. We wanted to talk about the business. So, and it comes down to, back to where we started. I think it's about employing people who are.
And it all sounds easy, but quite often in an entrepreneur hiring their replacement, it can go wrong, can't it? And 6 or 12 months in, realise that not working. Maybe the entrepreneur hired somebody from too big a company. They then bring in management consultants, a whole team of people to do their work. And it's not the right cultural fit. You've got to get that sort of somebody, I think, with an entrepreneurial mentality, but has the experience of being able to operate the blueprint and really make it work.
Otherwise, it becomes just a transactional relationship. And also, I think it's the blend of absolutely employing. So if I look at the C-suite I built at Gymshark when I was CEO, every single one of those people in those lanes were far more qualified and better. I say far more qualified, not necessarily based on years of experience. So I'll give you an example of a young guy who started out in customer service at Gymshark, a guy called Nirin Chana, who ended up becoming the chief commercial officer. And he is now running one of probably the most impressive lifestyle apparel brands in Adenola in Manchester. Like, I met him as a young lad. He was like a sponge. He listened, understood people, understood business models, understood how to commercialize an operation. And now he's CEO of one of the fastest growing businesses in the UK. So I think it's a blend of employing people better with you, bringing some grey hair, not making sure that's not transactional, and also blending in where you give some of the more spirited younger members of people who have got phenomenal opportunities ahead of them. So
now, I think the most unusual thing about this story is 2021. Ben called you into his office, and I'm joking here. In Alan Sugar's language, he said, "Steve, you're fired." Now, that wasn't reality, was it? Because you then moved up to executive chairman, stayed on as non-exec.
Yep.
But Ben unusually wanted to take the reins back. He said, Steve has taught me everything I need to know about becoming a chief exec.
Well, maybe not everything, but yeah.
Normally, only take the reins back when it's not working. It was working phenomenally well between the two of you. But just tell us a bit about that story and what happened.
It goes back to, I think you have to freshen up the dressing room occasionally, and I think you have to start with yourself. So when I first got involved in GS, I promised Ben and his dad, Steve, who's still a very good friend of mine, that I would help them get the business to 100 million. But it was so much fun that actually when we got to 100 million, it wasn't never about the numbers. It was actually about the journey. And it's not necessarily about the journey. It's about who's on the journey with you. That counts, I think. So when we got to 2021, we were like now surpassing 500 million, and we had 1,200 people employed across 5 offices across 4 continents. And what we had done with Ben is we had specifically put him into all of the functions over the last sort of the prior 24 months. So actually, he understood how finance worked. He understood how, like, he's a very smart guy, Ben. It doesn't take him very long to get it. But by the time we got to 2021, he actually became this super generalist. So he wasn't just good in one area where he first started. And I was like, listen, Ben, I think we need a new CEO. I don't think it's me anymore. I think I've got us to where I think I can get us to. And he said, well, who's the next CEO? I said, I think it's you. And he was like, really? And I was like, we have molded you. We've prepped you for the last 24 months. And of course, you're going to make mistakes. You're still young, as you know, even when you're old or older, you still make mistakes. But I think you're ready. And he was like, absolutely, let's go and do this. And I said, and I left him with one. I remember sending him an email, but there was one thing that I put in the email in capital letters, and I said, as a CEO, you are always on. Like, most people talk about work-life balance these days, and switching off, and that's important. As a CEO, I don't think you can ever switch off. So I said, as long as you are understanding that that's the role and that's what you're signing up to, then then go for it, and make sure that the people that you look after, they're in your charge, right? So it's not the other way around.
Yes.
And Ben is a he's a super humble individual, and you know what? There's not, most people would have gone, let's just go and find a new CEO somewhere else, and he was like, no, let's go and do it.
Yeah, great. So I think the summary would be, for anybody listening, that an entrepreneur thinking, should I bring in a CEO, is have the courage to do it. I know that you came in sort of personal contact and not via a headhunter.
Yep.
But if somebody hasn't got a personal contact to somebody that thinks, oh, they'd make a great chief exec, then I think also need to have the courage to go to a headhunter.
Yeah, and also spend some, we talk about, headhunters, spend some real time referencing that person, not just in terms of their ability to do the job, but does actually the personality fit? It doesn't mean to say the personality has to be same, but is there a yin and yang? Because if you're employing somebody who's exactly the same as you, you're probably going to get the same result. Just to reinforce what I said earlier, young founders especially, or young entrepreneurs, is do not hire somebody to be the CEO or the MD and then not trust. Do not delegate or trust. It's delegate and trust. Otherwise, it will not work.
Step 6, Richard, is go global with locals, which is all about international expansion. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so go global with locals. And if I look back, my entrepreneurial dream was around, I thought one day I'll go to America, I'll copy a business idea and bring it back to little UK and make it happen here.
Yeah.
And many businesses start in the US before they come to the UK. And so when I went to the US for the first time, travelling there as part of Homeserve, and
you start on the East Coast or West Coast?
This was 2001,
right?
And this was East Coast, and utility home assistance cover just didn't exist. I thought, wow, fantastic. I can conquer America. It's going to be really straightforward. America is 5 times the size of the UK.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do? I'm going to send that UK chief exec that did a really good job over here, call them back into my office and say, this time promoted again and you're off to America. And they accepted. And then let's set up in Miami, because that's where our insurer and claims handling operation were.
Yep.
I'm a Yorkshireman and bit tight with my money and didn't want the cost of a separate office, so we rented an office in Matt Frey Assistance's call centre, and soon learnt 2 big learnings. Number 1, be in the right place in America.
Yep.
And I think for British businesses, much better to be East Coast, between Boston, New York, Washington, DC.
Yep.
5-hour time difference. And then you also recruit really good Americans. In Miami, we found that they either wanted to go to the beach at 4 p.m. or smoke dope. And if you
Sounds
want a
a bit like Yorkshire.
serious business, you need serious career Americans.
Yeah.
And then the other bit that I got wrong was Americans buy from Americans. And if you've got a Brit, however good they are, and mine was fantastic, that it's going to be slower than hiring a great American. So wind the clock forward 7 years. We set up in America in 2003, got to 2010, and we're doing okay. The business made in 2010 $10 million of annual profit, but we hadn't signed enough utilities on the same model as the UK. And because we were now an hour north from New York in Norwalk, Connecticut, opened up a whole new catchment of great Americans, hired a guy called Tom Rusin, and he's still with Homeserve today, 15 years later.
Wow.
And guess what? Homeserve North America made $250 million annual profit last year.
How did that compare to the UK? Better?
Much better, bigger country, and that
opportunity.
became the jewel in the crown of Homeserve Group. So
Love that story.
So that was sort of the learning on Go Global with locals. But tell me about the American adventure with Gymshark, and also about other international development.
Yeah, you know what? Turbulent is probably the way that I would summarise this. And again, you know, you make mistakes, as I talked about earlier. You make mistakes as a CEO. So definitely made a few mistakes, not too dissimilar to the ones that you've just talked about actually with Homeserve there. Gymshark, because of the American YouTube influencer sort of community, we'd actually built up a US business relatively well with a bit of pull, to be honest. You know, really organic business, online sales from effectively a UK website, from a UK distribution centre into America.
So it's a sort of virtual business. You didn't have any real physical presence there.
Yeah, I mean, again, if I go back to my Reebok and Adidas days, there was borders. Like, you had retailers who had exclusive territories, and that's how you worked that organisation and that segmentation plan from a distribution point of view. Gymshark being an e-com brand and actually being a social media e-com brand, actually no borders really, apart from dealing with duties and more the back end in terms of the logistics side. But generally from a front end, no limitations. There's a challenge with that, which means that you can hit way too many countries way too quickly. And the danger of sort of trying to be everything to everyone means that your brand becomes less relatable. So if I go back to where we started, the plan was always to dominate our own home backyard here in the UK, especially sort of Birmingham and then sort of key cities from there. The US was initially probably just an afterthought, but obviously, as you said, 320 million people, the land of opportunity, 50 odd states. We actually found that when we launched a new product, the actual pull from an NPD perspective was really good and high converting, probably because of the ambassadors and influencers and the community that we were building there. So we got to a point where the US business quickly, we've gone from like 5 to 13 mil, 13 to 42. And we're now hitting £100 million a year annual sales.
And tell us again what year that was. So how many years in before America? So
we're talking 2014 would have been 5 million, 2015, 8, 9. So yeah, in that 2015 to 18 sort of period. But quite quickly we recognised that the US was like 35% of the business, which was, in our sector was almost unheard of. So we then started to think about actually how do we execute the US, and what we worked out that, and I'm going to smile here, us Brits, we think we understand America because we've been to Florida for a weekend or maybe a couple of weeks, should I say, with the, in the Disneyland parks. We might have been New York shopping with our partners, so we think we understand New York. And we might have miserably tried surfing on the West Coast, especially Yorkshiremen, by the way. And the reality is we don't understand anything about their culture. And people look at America as just one big country. There's not. There's actually, if you look at the regional cultural differences in the US, there's 6 6 defined different regional cultures. The West Coast is very different to East. Chicago is very, very different to Texas. Texas is very different to Florida. So the way that even your brand locally shows up there has to have that local accent. And what we found is we were never going to be able to scale the US with the ambition we wanted to, being just based out of the UK and effectively employing a lot of British people who thought they understood America. So we decided to actually open an office. We decided to go out and find a general manager, which we did. A guy called Peter Arch, who was a phenomenal guy I'd worked with for many, many years. And we had done a lot of work on which city to go to, and we went to Denver. And the reason we went to Denver, Colorado, is the second most sought after city to live in for young professionals. And we thought that was important when we built out the American team to understand our brand. To your point earlier, though, what you find with Denver, Colorado is that the time, 5 hours New York to 7 hours in Colorado, you think, well, it's only 2 hours. That's enormous when you've got a UK HQ to deal with. So straight away, the American team that we built from one person to sort of 10, 20 relatively quickly, we're saying, you know what, I don't really want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning because the product team in the UK only can do the call at like 11 a.m. And the UK product team were like, I'm not staying till after 6 p.m. at night because I'm on my own time zone. So it's interesting you talk about time zone. Time zone is one of the biggest challenges. So I agree with you. Actually, if you're going to set up in the US, probably start with the East Coast. And bear in mind, we had our sourcing office. One of the sourcing offices was in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong to Denver, that time lag is very, very different. But I think if you want to build a brand that is going to be really relatable and authentic with the American audience, you can't do it with just a British set of eyeballs. We took it to the full extent, and probably one of my learnings, we went from one person to 120 people.
Based physically on the ground in the US.
And that was too many. We did that too quickly. So,
and when did you hire a US general manager or MD?
So MG general manager was our first hire. But looking back now, we probably felt that at the time, we felt we needed to have a US presence across every single function. The reality is, as long as you apply your core ingredients from what effectively turns on the customer in the first place, and apply a local accent to
more
that,
the front of the house stuff, and you've got somebody who understands the local marketing and regulations and those bits.
Yeah, but even just simple things from a commercial point of view. So a men's jogger, one of the key categories for Gymshark, a men's jogger does not resonate in the US. A men's pant resonates in the US.
So that's simple. We think that it's the same language, don't we? English and American, and it's absolutely not. That's a great example.
And
what happened when you change that one word to the sales?
Conversion smashes through the roof, right? Look at the three of us, right? We're British based or European based. We wear navy, we wear grey, we wear white. New York, you go to California, like the guys there are wearing yellow and red. You're not going to see much yellow and red. Even in London, you're not going to see much yellow and red today, right? And it's a sunny day. So it's actually applying the core ingredients that work in terms of brand proposition and product proposition, but applying a local lens. What I wouldn't do, and this was my fault, it was nobody else's fault, is go from 1 to 120 people. You do not need to do that. You need that local flavour who have always got that local set of eyeballs.
And then how did America fit with international development in other countries and hiring general managers there?
Yeah, I think, the American, again, one of the things that I would throw caution to is if you're going to hire an American team, they are very driven by money. And the maths have to work for them as well. So where you have compensation packages here in Europe, they don't stack up in the same way. So, for example, sweat equity here, most people sort of shy away from or don't quite like giving a piece of the pie away. In the US, if you want that big hitter who's actually going to scale your business really quickly, they're probably not even going to take a second interview if there's not skin in the game. So make sure that you incentivize them. So I think the mindset from an American GM leadership team perspective is probably slightly different to the way it is in
And
Europe.
it's hard, isn't it, to have the courage to an American that would be like for like the same as the Brit need to pay them between 2 and 3 times.
Way more expensive. Way more expensive.
I remember having the courage that my chief exec in the US was earning more than me, and I was running the whole of the group. But thought, well, it's worth it because that's going to make the big difference. We've got to hire somebody that's fantastic, and it worked.
Well, the GM eventually that we ended up landing on in the US ended up becoming one of the most well-paid people in the organisation, and we were very honest and open about that because actually that's just the territory, that's just the culture, that's just the environment. So certainly don't shy away from that would be my advice. The other thing, thinking about just international expansion full stop, not just the US, is I would try and also keep your business model from a geo perspective as simple as possible for as long as possible. So certainly with British-based founders and entrepreneurs, the US is the big thing. They want to, it's the shiny new penny. It's the thing that's going to catapult our business. And sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. There's some great examples of where that works and where that hasn't worked. My view is make sure you get the blueprint right in your home market. Make sure you iron out those creases. Make sure that you understand. So when you do go, it doesn't become super expensive.
So timing is one of the big questions, isn't it? Is when do you go into a new country? And I think many businesses do it too quickly.
Yep.
And as you say, they haven't got their home business sorted out.
Yep.
How can they possibly do it successfully in another country? So I guess it's about don't wait until the UK is ground to a halt in terms of growth, but don't go too early. And then make sure that you've got somebody on the ground that's taken over the running of the UK. Otherwise, it's going to slow down if the founder's then out prospecting in a new country before they then hire a local.
100%. And especially with the US, don't look at the US as one big country, especially with consumer goods, inventory-based business or brands, is go with a key city approach. You don't have to go after, there's lots of big cities in the US with lots of populations. Go after 2 or 3 cities, but like Passenger, Justin and John and the guys there have done a phenomenal job of building like their whole view is let's build epicenters and let's then get that ripple effect, but let's focus on the epicenter. And I think you just get a much bigger bang for your buck when you do that.
Rentokil was a great example of that. They said, we're not going into Brazil, we're going into Sao Paulo.
Yep.
And then we're going into Rio. And their model was going and buying local rat-catching pest control businesses, but they didn't go into the whole country.
Yep.
They just bought locally, and that was a model that really worked.
And the other thing as well is, I work with a lot of different brands in the UK, some phenomenally fast-growing brands who should be super proud of what they've built. You also don't have to apply the same model that you've applied to your UK business. So
I was going to ask you this question, and I get asked in my growth workshops every week that entrepreneurs come to that are turning over more than 3 million, and they're thinking, when do I do international? And we've talked about that. But how much of the model should you be prepared to change in going into a new country?
Depends on what the end goal is for me and the measure of success that we talked about earlier. So I won't name the brand because it'd be disrespectful, and they're doing a phenomenal job. But this brand is now a £40 million turnover business. It's 4 or 5 years old. Their strategy in the UK is to effectively own the customer data. So they do that through e-com, and they do that through their own stores or certainly concessions within retailers. So they own the data. And 20% of that is then utilising strategic retailers to effectively showcase their product to sell it through. When they went into the US, they completely flipped that and actually put 80% of their business model behind one big strategic retailer who just dominates the US in that segment. And 20% of that comes through in that market now comes through this e-com where you've got the full global range. And the mixture of both those strategies together in terms of that omni-channel approach, but different by geo, is that they're smashing it. So you don't always have to apply the exact same blueprint.
Or maybe that's the exception. I would say that maybe change 10 or 15% of the model. the minimum possible, because if one day a business is in 20 countries,
Yeah.
and if it was 25% different in every country, that's going to be a recipe for complexity and disaster, isn't it?
Back to keeping the business model simple, right?
Change the minimum. And I guess with passenger clothing, the biggest single thing is Americans are bigger sizes.
Yeah. As I said, bigger sizes. Color palette doesn't always work. Sometimes you can actually have your brand position too cheap. So we think here in the UK that, very sensitive of price positioning. Actually, if it's too cheap in the US market looks at it and goes, it mustn't be any good in terms of quality. So even your price positioning can tweak in certain categories.
Great point. Don't just look at exchange rate and vary the pricing.
Which is what most people do.
Ask the customer what they're prepared to pay and do some research, because you could well get a big premium in America.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the summary for me in terms of like thinking about how a brand should internationalize is absolutely dominate your home market. I say dominate. That doesn't mean to say you've hit the ceiling. I don't mean that. As in dominate the understanding of where your blueprint works and doesn't work, and then apply those core ingredients with local lenses to then scale with a local accent your brand in that particular territory.
And have the courage to pay what it takes to get a great local to run your business on the ground there.
And I'm smiling at that because most founders and entrepreneurs do not want to do that, and you have to do it, right? So you have to do it. So
you've got to. It's why get investment if you need to do it, but you shouldn't open a new country on a shoestring, should you?
Yeah. And again, founders, entrepreneurs sometimes don't like sharing the success in terms of, growth shares or EMI shares, depending on which way you want to do it. There's nothing like that. Relate them to growth hurdles. Incentivize them on hitting growth hurdles, whether that's revenue or ideally a combination of revenue and both profitability, because you'll motivate them and the business wins at the same time as well. So, but also make sure that the relationship, it goes back to, the founder CEO relationship. Just make sure that they also understand the values of the business, the values of you as a founder, and making sure that they sync and it's not just a transactional relationship, because that will not work either.
Richard, Steve, it's been absolutely fascinating and a privilege to hear you both talk about those 3 steps today. So thank you, Richard, and Steve, thank you very much.
Guys, thank you very much for having me. It's been a real privilege.
Thanks,
thank you, guys.
You've been listening to How to Make a Billion in 9 Steps with Richard Harpin. Our producer is Lucy McPhee. To find out more about Richard's 9 steps and how to build a successful business, you can find his book, How to Make a Billion in 9 Steps, online at Amazon or any good bookshop now.